Hi everybody, I'm Kevin with the Wildlife Channel. Today we're going to take a look at the construction of a pond in Montana from start to finish. We'll be stocking fish in a separate video, so be sure to subscribe to the Wildlife Channel and watch future videos on catching those trout and how big they grow. There's a complete time-lapse video of this pond construction also on the Wildlife Channel. The link to that video is in the description below. A dinosaur was found in the making of this pond. Get a quick look at the first bone found later in this video. It's late June when construction started. There are springs on this Montana ranch that feed this pond, and there's a small stream fed by springs that flows through the bottom of this valley. First, the shrubs, trees, and topsoil need to be removed from the site, and this is the goal for the first couple of days. The topsoil was then removed and stored for replacement on the completed area. The aspen and diamond willow trees were stacked out of the way for future use. The aspens were used for firewood. The diamond willows went to an artisan that builds canes, walking sticks, and furniture from this highly valued wood. The base of the dam was excavated and then compacted with red clay to provide a seal to make sure the water does not seep underneath. A trench was cut through the base of the dam from the upstream channel. The pipe was then compacted with soil. In this pond, the downspout and outflow pipe are 24-inch diameter steel. The pipe through the dam is 120 feet in length, and a 15-foot standpipe was attached once the dam completion was at a certain stage. The stream was blocked in an upstream culvert under an existing road so that the standpipe could be installed while the flow was stopped. The big earth mover scraped and pushed the dirt from each side of the stream up to the dam. Approximately 12,000 cubic yards of earth was excavated and compacted to form the dam. On the sixth day of the build, the final shaping of the bottom of the pond was completed. The blockage was then removed from the upstream culvert and the pond began to fill. An additional 4 feet of dirt was added to the top of the dam to get it to the proper elevation. A farm road was also cut into the hillside. It was at this time that a dinosaur was discovered in the hillside road cut. Be sure to subscribe to this Wildlife Channel after this video and ring the notification bell so that you can watch the dinosaur discovery and excavation videos that will follow. That's right, Jurassic Wildlife on the Wildlife Channel. The open water attracted wildlife immediately. A red fox was one of the first visitors. A red-tailed hawk was a surprise visitor to the water. A mink made a quick visit. White-tailed deer outnumber mule deer on this ranch. They're more comfortable drinking from the new open water than from the small stream. This great blue heron arrived a little early. The fish won't be stocked for a while. A Montana domestic animal water permit was first secured for the pond after it filled. A second, more complicated permit for the fishery and irrigation was then started. More about that later. Branches, roots, and rocks were then removed from the disturbed areas. Disking, harrowing, and seeding came next. Erosion control was also installed on the slopes to keep the dirt in place. By the time fall arrived, the pond was about half filled with water. New ponds are basically sterile when they're completed. There's not a food chain yet established. Stocking fish at this point could lead to their starvation. We went downstream 500 yards and raked up some native water plants from the bottom of a large spring creek. Included with the plants were bacteria and insects, as well as some freshwater shrimp. We used a few buckets of this material and inoculated the pond with a local native species food chain, which should ensure a successful fishery. Winter arrived with the pond about 3/4 filled from the springs. The following March, the snow and ice began to melt, and the pond filled for the first time. That took 8.5 months. Water began to flow through a downspout and formed a small spillway. Waterfowl began to be interested in the new pond. we built a floating nesting box and placed it in the water. A pair of Canadian geese found it to be a great place to build their nest. A Montana mid-May snow squall arrived as the eggs hatched. They shook it off and did what geese do. We also built and installed a nesting box for wood ducks. A road with a 4-foot diameter culvert had been installed several years before the dam was designed. The road divided the pond into 2 sections now. Water flooded 300 feet of upstream channel, along with some shrubs and a few aspen trees. This created a wetlands that would provide cover for nesting birds and an area rich in food for the bacteria, insects, and shrimp that would eventually feed the fish. As the water warmed, we took a net to the pond and looked for signs of life. These freshwater shrimp, also known as scuds, took hold from the fall inoculation and seemed to be thriving. It appears that the shrimp were breeding, a sign that a significant food chain had been established. The few buckets of plants that were tossed in last fall took root and were spreading around the sides of the pond. The plants would provide food and cover for insects and the shrimp. Water in Montana and the right to use it have laws more than 100 years old. A new water right, like the one we were applying for, fishery and irrigation, is a complex process. Inflow and outflow rates for the pond needed to be measured monthly for a year. For irrigation, pump and sprinkler rates needed to be calculated and included in the application. Normally, this process takes about a year to 18 months to complete and be determined. For a fishery permit, studies were completed to determine the potential impacts to downstream fish by state biologists. The local biologists would determine what species of fish we would be allowed to stock if permitted. Food plots for wildlife began to flourish. With improved wildlife habitat, the numbers of species increased. My son would take this whitetail buck with bow and arrow a couple of months later. Bears also feed heavily on clover in the spring after hibernation. This cinnamon-phased black bear in the fall was more interested in finding the remains of the deer my son shot a couple of days earlier. For the first time on the ranch, a Shiras moose visited and was caught on trail camera 100 yards below the dam. Wildlife from a mile or more away was attracted by the food plots and open water. Another fall and winter would come before our application for irrigation and fishery water rights permit would be determined. In the 3rd spring, we were finally granted legal water rights by the state for both fish and irrigation use from the pond. Once the pond fishery permit was approved, we were able to contact a state-approved hatchery to purchase fish to stock in the pond that spring. Our approved species to stock was rainbow trout. The closest hatchery had rainbow trout fingerlings, and we purchased 300 of them to stock in May. In our next video, 2 to 4 inch rainbow trout will be stocked in the pond. This pond has no other fish, so the growth rate will be fun to watch. Other ponds in the area with freshwater shrimp have grown rainbow trout up to 10 pounds. Subscribe to the Wildlife channel so you can watch these trout being stocked and track how big and fast these fish grow.